Matthew Fox is a spiritual theologian, an Episcopal priest, and an activist for gender justice and eco-justice. He has written 37 books and is the founder of the University of Creation Spirituality in California.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Trimble. I'm the CEO of Convergence, and I am overjoyed, honored, thrilled to be talking with friend and colleague and visionary and provocateur, troublemaker, priest, author, all kinds of things, Matthew Fox today. Matthew, it's really great to be with you.
Thank you, Cameron. Glad to be with you.
Yes. So as we thought about this topic of the future of spirituality and wanting to build a 5-day conversation with some of the thought leaders, you, of course, were at the top of that list because you've spent a whole lifetime wondering about this question and researching this and living it. You also have a new book out that I want to bring everyone's attention to. And actually what I should do is say, so you've got many books and they almost all of them are on these two shelves. So there's so many. It's and I'm working my way through all of them. But this latest one that you have coming out is what shall we best describe it? A summation maybe of the Matthew Fox thinking.
Yes, it's excerpts from my books, from all of my books. And it's in a series. Here's actually the book itself, an advanced copy. It's in a series that Orbis Books has put out on various spiritual thinkers. Series is called Modern Spiritual Masters series. But what they've done is they take excerpts. Well, I didn't take them. Charles Burak did the selecting and wrote the introduction, but I did have a say in it. And so it's a nice summary, I think, of my writings over the years. And as you say, there have been around 40 books. Yeah. So that's a good summary for, the sections, for example, a section on the mystics, a section on ecology and social justice and feminism, and of course, original blessing and what creation spirituality is and so forth. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a nice summary. Mm-hmm.
Good. So we want to make sure that everyone knows about that. And then one of the other incredible gifts that you give to the world are daily meditations. And if you go to MatthewFox.org, is that right? You
can just go to Daily Meditations with MatthewFox.org.
Okay. All right. And sign up for those because what you send out is balm for weary souls and often deeply inspiring. So this brings us to this question of future of spirituality. And when I ask that question, what is the future of spirituality? What comes to mind for you? What do you see?
Well, an awful lot of things, because as you say, this has been my shtick for 50 years. But first of all, I think that there's a great future for spirituality because I think there are so many issues around survival today, such as how we're treating Mother Earth and how climate change is treating us in response. And of course, the onslaught of war, the omnipresent danger of war that we're, as of this filming, deeply in with the Ukraine invasion. And of course, to me, the deeper dimensions to both of these issues are the repression of the divine feminine for centuries. And so the return of the divine feminine and a remaking of the healthy masculine. I think that the unhealthy masculine, toxic masculine of patriarchy has reigned for long enough. And with it goes empire building. And we see that going on daily now in the Ukraine tragedy. And so it's bringing back the divine feminine and the healthy masculine. So a new marriage, a sacred marriage of the feminine and masculine is very much needed. And I just don't think we're going to survive as a species without it. And of course, part of the return of the divine feminine is wisdom. And so that raises a whole nother question. Our educational systems, are they capable of teaching spirituality? Are they capable of teaching values at all? No, they aren't, to the extent that they're totally committed to the left brain, to what Einstein called the rational brain. And by education, I include seminary education. I think in general, seminaries have sold their soul to get academic accreditation from accrediting boards that don't have a clue what the difference between the feminine and the masculine education is. And that is to say, wisdom, who is feminine around the world, Sophia in Greek, and Chokmah in Hebrew, and Sapientia in Latin, and Kuan Yin over my shoulder here on the right. She's feminine, she's wisdom from the East. And of course, Mary and the Black Madonna represent wisdom from the West. So I think these are absolutely essential. These are bottom line if we're going to survive as a species. Now, we all know that there's a demise of religion going on, but there is a greater interest in spirituality. And I think that's because religion is like a great big ship. It can't turn very fast or stop very fast. And so we need this, we need new language and new rituals that may draw on the ancient, of course, but that are more grounded and in connection with Mother Earth. And so another dimension of new spirituality is the new science. That it's just absurd for religion to be fighting science. Science is a real ally today in saving the earth, literally, and telling us where Mother Earth is suffering and why, and therefore things we can do about it. So there needs to be a new rapport between spirituality and science. And of course, the new creation story is part of that rapport that explodes our sense of wonder and awe and gratitude, everything the mystics talk about when they're talking about the via positiva. So that's a big part of the new spirituality, and it translates into practical work on behalf of Mother Earth. So the whole question of renewable energy and of automobiles that are more gentle to Mother Earth, and so much else. So another dimension of the new spirituality is, of course, an explosion of creativity. We need an explosion of creativity if we're going to survive as a species. I mean, we have 7 years left, according to the latest science from the United Nations. We have to change our ways profoundly in 7 years. And that is where religion and spirituality have something to contribute, for sure. Metanoia, change of consciousness, call it paradigm shift, call it what you will. But to do it, religion has to yield to spirituality, because spirituality is the experience of the sacred, the experience of the divine. And we don't have time left, as I say, for basilicas on our back. We have to travel spiritually with backpacks on our back. And that, by that, I mean lighter versions of religion and practice, that because we need our hands free to do all the work, and we need time. Even we have to find succinct ways to pray that translate into our work, so that our work really becomes our prayer. And the work is work on behalf of community, on behalf of Mother Earth, on behalf of future generations, not just of humans, but of all God's creatures. And then, of course, a big uplifting dimension to the future spirituality is deep ecumenism, what I call deep ecumenism, some call interfaith, that we need to get together with the wisdom traditions of the world. And instead of arguing over theological details or dogmas, we need to be shoulder to shoulder and arm to arm, working on behalf of Mother Earth and on behalf of waking our particular traditions and lineages up, waking them up to the wisdom that's deeply within them. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh said that there are treasures in Christianity that could come out if Christianity would recover its non-dualist tradition. In other words, its mystical tradition, what Juliana Norwich, who's over my left shoulder, called oneing. the experience of God that happens in wanting. Meister Eckhart called it breakthrough, and Thomas Aquinas called it ecstasy. But in any case, it's the mystical experience of our being one with grace, with nature, therefore, and with oneself and with divinity. So I think that it's so important, these movements that are happening, and they're not just in religion, but say the women's movement, for example, is part of what I'm talking about, the divine feminine coming back in our religions and spiritualities. And so see, there's cultural movements that are already happening, science too, of course. And so many young people are feeling called today to study science and to employ it in the practical work, whether engineering or technology and so forth. I mean, the young are very aware of what's happening to the earth. And of course, this is their future. This is their grandchildren we're talking about. We older ones are going to be gone when things get really bad on this planet. So it's part of our work as elders too. And that's another dimension of spirituality in the future, is we have to reawaken the vocation of eldership, which works with and hand in hand with the young. So wisdom doesn't come just from the old or just from the young. It's a combination. I call it intergenerational wisdom. And the young know so much about the new technologies, and certainly in the electronic field and social media and so forth. So that's an issue. And then, of course, we need worship forms that are that bring in the body, because the body is our link to the universe and to the earth. And for too many centuries, thanks to the Platonic, dualistic, and Augustinian influence in Christianity, especially Western Christianity, we've been suspicious of our lower chakras. We've been taught to be. And yet this is what connects us to the earth. And so we have to reconnect to the earth if we're going to survive as a species, and if spirituality is going to make any difference at all. And here, of course, I especially invoke, when it comes to deep ecumenism, the wisdom of the indigenous peoples. They never left the universe behind. They never psychologized or anthropocentrized, or what Pope Francis calls narcissism. They didn't render their religion narcissistic, preaching that the purpose of life is to get to heaven and stay out of hell. That's so narrow. It's not what the Bible is about. It's about the whole universe celebrating its beauty and majesty and giftedness, and it's a mutual thing, give and take. So the indigenous people, they pray by dancing on the earth, not in a church, unless it's really bad weather. But the point is that there's so much wisdom that comes from all the traditions. We don't have to be in a competitive situation, except about one thing, and that is, what does your tradition bring to the saving of the planet and to the teaching of compassion? And what does it bring about finding the healthy balance with the feminine and the masculine? And a healthy masculine, what is a healthy masculine, as distinct from, say, the masculine being on display in Moscow at this very moment in history? But in many ways, that compulsion to control others is found in many versions of masculinity, not just out of Moscow, but we've plenty of people who think like that in Washington, D.C. too. So those are a few of the areas that I think need attention, and including education itself. That education itself is part of the problem, because as Einstein observed, we honor the rational brain in education in America, in the West, but not the intuitive brain. And for me, the intuitive brain is that right hemisphere of the brain that is, in fact, our mystical brain. And even religion has fallen into this rabbit hole of, that's why it's so preoccupied with doctrines and systematics and so forth. but does not teach people how to meditate, how to experience the unity, the divine. And it's not that hard. We did it for 45 years in my schools, and our basic practice was what I call art is meditation. So clay is meditation, or dance is meditation, or painting is meditation, or chanting, and so forth. That there are many ways to meditate, not just sitting in silence, although that has a place. But art is meditation. These psychologists, Narendra and Ornstein, in the 1970s, wrote a book on psychology of meditation, and they said that art is meditation. They called it extrovert meditation, but that's what I mean by art is meditation. This is the way of the prophets. So what we have to be doing is training mystics who are lovers and prophets who are spiritual warriors who stand up to injustice and those forces that are bringing about the demise of the planet. So this is a package. That is to say, if we can't change our modes of education, we're not going to survive. We're not going to bring along these values I'm talking about. But if we could, and we can, it's not an impossible thing to do. As I say, I did it in 3 different schools for adults and 1 school for inner city teenagers. It's fun to do, actually. Art as meditation is fun. It's about being creative, and it empowers people. That's why it is the way of the prophets. So this can be done, but it has to be done now, not later. We have 7 years left, so we just can't diddle around anymore. We can't be like Nero fiddling while Rome burns. We're busy fiddling while the whole earth is burning. And by we, I mean education, I mean religion, I mean politics and economics and the media. And part of it is, of course, that they've sold their souls to the capitalists who are making money on the degradation of the planet. They made, with the billionaires, double their billions during coronavirus, for God's sake. Well, in America alone, close to 1 million people have died of that disease. And of course, they buy politicians and they buy judges, because these very politicians they buy vote on judges. So, you know, the prophetic dimension of standing up to privilege, including the patriarchal privilege and the privilege of race and of gender, all that is part of the spiritual journey of the prophet. And so that's how I see it. The mystic and the prophet feed each other, and adult spirituality is about empowering both in everybody. We're all mystics and prophets. You don't have to look to a monastery of professional prayers. It's too late for that. We have to gather the same energy of contemplation and action, of mysticism and prophecy. And that's what it means to teach spirituality. And I think there could be a true revigoration of religion if we put spirituality first. And that is how you reorganize and regenerate religion. Like Carl Jung said, that only the mystic brings what is creative to religion itself. And we are in a time when religion has to reinvent itself. Everything has to reinvent itself. And so the mysticism, spirituality, the experiential side of religion has to lead. And this is, after all, what wisdom means. So wisdom comes from the word for taste, both in Hebrew and in Latin. And so tasting, like the psalmist says from wisdom literature, taste and see that God is good. That's that has to step forward. And, you know, Thomas Kuhn, the scientist who laid out the basics of a paradigm shift a number of years ago, I don't know, 40 years ago or so, he said that one of the signs of paradigm shift is that what used to be peripheral moves to center stage. Well, wisdom has been peripheral. The feminine has been peripheral. Spirituality has been peripheral. Mysticism has been peripheral. This is all, and then even science for hundreds of years was peripheral to religion. Well, I'm saying, and cosmology, the cosmos. So I'm saying all this stuff has to move to center stage. And that's what I've been trying to midwife in my work over the decades. And I think that the direness of our times, of our situation as a species, vis-a-vis climate change and vis-a-vis our obvious capacities for war and destruction, hatred, and all the rest, the direness of our times is the fire that can light our spiritual traditions to be truer to the message of Jesus, and as well as the message of other gifted leaders, from the Buddha to Isaiah to Muhammad, and Black Elk and Dorothy Day, and all these other avatars over the centuries that have tried to show us the way.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing what you're calling for is just a complete overhaul of the current global framework, the way the world works, and you're wanting to, as you say, pull into the center which has been at the margins. And I'm also holding this tension of, and we've got 7 years left. I'm wondering, how do we accelerate that? How do we, is it at the individual level, or is some of us leading organizations, some of us, can possibly influence in our vocational spaces, but what are you seeing any points of leverage that if we're made conscious that we could move this along?
Yes, I do see it happening both, as individuals and families and communities, and as I say, in our work, in our professions. For example, business draws a lot of bright people, and business is waking up to how 7 years from now, it doesn't matter how rich your company is, if the sea is going to be swamping your offices and so forth. I mean, these are realities. I mean, there are guesses at how many hundreds of millions of people are going to be. I mean, we think this current immigration out of Ukraine is terrible, and it is terrible. We're seeing it on live TV every night. That's 3 million people so far. But the truth is, when the sea rises, there are going to be hundreds of millions of human beings around the world, many of them from our biggest cities, because they're on the water, like Miami and New York and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles and San Francisco. And that's just this country, but all over the world, that are going to be packing their bags. And where are they all going to go? Even now we have all these problems with immigration in Europe and in America, at our southern border and so forth. And much of that immigration, the media doesn't talk about it, but a lot of that immigration is due already to climate change. You can see satellite photos from 25 years ago. Central America was essentially green back then, as was North Africa. Today, you see the same areas, satellite photos. Central America is turning brown, and all of North Africa has turned brown. So, when humans can't grow their food, they move. It's either that or die, isn't it? So, hey, and then now, of course, climate change, there's the added thing of the floods that are coming and the seas that are rising. Plus, of course, the wildfires. And here in Northern California, where I live, that has become a reality. There used to be 1 month or so a year that wildfires were dangerous. Today, it's 12 months a year that we have wildfires in Florida. Not a laughing matter, but it's astounding. So in answer to your question, one thing that moves humans is necessity. And I think that as the facts get out, if the media would start doing their job and telling the truth, of course, one of the problems is, as I alluded to, that much of the media is owned by people who don't want to tell the truth. Rupert Murdoch would be a chief in that regard. But there should be enough media that's telling the truth. And the truth should be enough to light a fire in our pants. And it's not about being a Christian or a Buddhist or an atheist or a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman or priest. It is about being able to survive and your children to survive, and being a good parent and a good grandparent. That, you know, we can't just mouth these words, oh, I love my children, I love my grandchildren, give them presents every Christmas. Well, the one present that's needed is a planet that works and that is still beautiful and healthy. And, you know, all that's, you see, that's part of mysticism, is not taken for granted. That's why to recognize that how every day the experience of God is as close as breathing. Every breath we take is spirit, is ruah. And it's so easy to take that for granted when we've got other problems. But what crises, and you talk about trauma, what these traumas and crises remind us of is that we can no longer take healthy air for granted, or soil, or water, the basics. We're back to the basics. And so we have to charge our sense of gratitude and reverence, and they go together. The mystics talk about them. And we have to charge that up. And but I think it's actually much easier to do in the midst of a crisis, insofar as you can get some distance from the crisis. But I mean, to realize that, as you say, with 7 years left, we should be meditating and leading meditations on 7 years from today, you see. So we should begin there and then work our way back to today. And then we can ask, what can we do? What do we do? For example, I know a number of young people who are not going to college because they feel, first, it's very expensive, but secondly, they don't think they're going to get that much out of it because they don't feel that intensity, that passion to change the world in positive ways. Now, I'm not countenancing that no one go to college, because one needs skills, so one needs to know things. But there are other ways to learn important things besides going to college. You can apprentice with engineers who know important things, for example. And I do think that online education, which is, of course, COVID has hurried up, is a, it can be a shortcut for a lot of people to learn what they need to know in order to contribute to this common effort, the common good. And so I think that it's our job as adults and elders, those who are at that stage, to make ourselves available and to create workshops that make it possible for people to get more in touch with their mysticism, more in touch with their deepest spiritual selves, and with the tradition and these great figures we have, like this lady over my shoulder, Julian Norwich, but so many, Meister Eckhart, Hildegard of Bingen. These people, because they were pre-modern, they don't begin their religion with human sin. They begin with religion with the universe, the macrocosm. And that's exactly what we need today. This is that basic paradigm shift we have to make from human-centeredness, our narcissism, to the universe in all its glory and wonder. Now we just sent up this new Webb telescope. It's going to bring back amazing stories of the origin of light and the origin of our universe, our origins, that can unite us as a species and will fill us with awe and wonder and gratitude. And that's the beginning of everything. As Rabbi Hesed says, awe is the beginning of wisdom. So if we can shift from knowledge to wisdom, we have a chance as a species. So there's, and already, as I alluded to, there are so many wonderful movements. There is the women's movement. There is the gay and lesbian movement that helps to redefine the rigidity of our gender definitions and so forth. And there's a men's movement too, and there should be more of it. And there are movements to reinvent economics. And so it serves everybody, not just a few. And so there are these movements. And of course, there are always artists who are eager to awaken people through their gifts of music and theater and painting and dance and so many other ways of awakening people. And of course, real worship and ritual should do that. It should be leading the way. Ritual is a shortcut to waking up, and through multi-generations, waking one another up to our common joy and our common grief and our common empowerment to make a difference and to bring compassion and justice forward. So these are some of the ways. And, religion has become quite tired and old, I think, in the West. And I think all this we're talking about could light a fire. I just had an interesting interview this week from a fellow who was very close to Ram Dass. And when they were both 20, they went to India because they were fed up with religion in the West, including they had a bad experience with their Judaism. And they knew nothing about Christ. In fact, this fellow told me that his teacher in the synagogue, like Sunday school, really put down Christ, really was very negative. So they landed in India. They don't know anything about meditation or anything about the East, but there they are. And their first guru or teacher was teaching them. Now he said, you have to pray like Christ did. And they looked at each other and said, what? We don't know anything about Christ either. And then they said, well, how do we pray like Christ did? And then this guy who's a Hindu, he's not a Christian at all. He went into this deep state, this trance-like, he shut his eyes when in a trance, and then tears started coming down his eyes. And he said, of course, he said that Christ never died. And then he pulled out of his trance state and said that, that's how you pray to the Christ consciousness, and so we're going to bring it in. So, I mean, I was pretty amazed by that story because I think even that one sentence, Christ never died, well, that's a pretty good summary of the resurrection, see, that you can tune in to the risen Christ, but you got to have practices to do it. You don't have just words and concepts, you got to have the practices.
So a lot of people who will be watching this conversation are either invested in or leading congregations. So they're in these systems. And I was thinking about, as you were speaking, what would it be like to create a curriculum that could be rooted in these places and these spaces that do exist for however long they will exist. You've created a curriculum in your schools. In fact, there's a book about it. When you said all, it's somewhere on I've read it. But what would be in the curriculum, like a global curriculum that accelerates our understanding of what you're trying to teach us here?
Well, that's a really good question. And I like the word curriculum because I have been in education as long as I've been in the priesthood, really. Cosmology, that is the story, the new story of the universe, the new creation story. But I invite people working in churches even today, go back to the first chapter of Genesis, chapter 1. Reread it. Notice, it doesn't say one word about sin and evil. Humans are the last to come, which is very much what today's scientific race story is. And it begins with light, which is interesting because today's science story begins with fireball. And everything is called good. Light is good, and then the moon is good, and the trees are good, and the animals are good, and all is good. And humans come on board, and then the whole picture is very good. And that Hebrew word that we translate as good can also be translated as beautiful. The whole universe is very beautiful. So our Bible begins with cosmology. Why is cosmology so excluded in seminary training? And I'll tell you why. Because you want to jump into sin. You want to start religion with sin. That is such a mistake. It's not what religion is here to do. Thomas Aquinas says the essence of religion is supreme gratitude and thankfulness. That's what religion is about. And sin doesn't make you that grateful, really. So, and one thing might be nice if you brought something useful to cleanse the temptation to sin, if you will. And that is our existence, cosmology. So you've got to pay attention to the new creation story. And, there are good versions of it out there, Thomas Berry and Brian Swim, their Universe Storybook, and there are other things, and Brian did a film as well. And so that's absolutely essential. And that's why I talk about creation spirituality. You begin with creation, not with the human. The human is 13.8 billion years late on the scene. And it may have taken that long to prepare for us, not just in terms of the presence of the earth like this for our fragile bodies, but also for the universe and earth to brace itself for what we were bringing. Because what we bring is a lot of genius, a lot of brilliance, a lot of love and hope and music and good stuff, but we also bring a lot of shadow and a lot of potential for evil. We've taken over this planet in less than 300,000 years, and we're the first species to do that. And here we are right on the edge of annihilating it as we know it, both by climate change or nuclear war. So, we are, the human race is a piece of work. And that's why we've had many religious teachers, East and West, coming, all saying the same thing, essentially. Hey, you're capable of compassion, but you got to work at it, because you're also capable of killing your brother Cain. There we go, Cain and Abel. See,
Yes.
there's that choice, and then there are other choices. So that would be very important. You must have creation again, but you can link it to chapter 1. I think Christians should memorize chapter 1, because that takes us out of our anthropocentrism. And then realize that Jesus himself comes from the wisdom tradition of Israel. That's huge. We're sure of that now. Scientists, biblical scholars are sure of that. The wisdom tradition is the creation tradition of Israel. It's about finding God in nature. And that's what Jesus did. That all his parables about that. And so to reset our Christology in the context, not of the Nicene Creed, which was called in the 4th century by the emperor, when Christianity took over the empire. Pause about that. Let's go back further to the beginning. The cosmic Christ is at the beginning of Christianity. It's in Paul's letters, the first writer of the New Testament. So, and it's everywhere in the major events in Jesus' life. I try to put out, a book on Stations of the Cosmic Christ with Bishop Mark Andrews, and my book on the coming of the Cosmic Christ. So the Cosmic Christ is not some 20th century New Age dream, fantasy. It's in our earliest sources. Why we squashed it? Because in the modern era, we became so self-centered as a species. And of course, Thomas Berry says that we lost creation spirituality during the Black Death because of the pandemic of the 14th century, which of course makes Julian so important, because she was living at that time. Her whole life was during the period of the pandemic that kept coming back and killed between 1 out of 2 and 1 out of 3 Europeans. It's a lot of people, a lot more than have died in the current pandemic. And she did not go down that rabbit hole of concluding that nature is something to be afraid of, which is what the dominant culture concluded. She says that God is the goodness in nature. God is that nature is the first goodness that we experience. She goes on and on about the doxa, the glory of nature, just like the wisdom writer, the psalmist says that the whole earth is filled with God's glory, or doxa. So, I have to understand some history about why religion went so bad. So after the 14th century, religion was defined essentially out of fear of hell or fear of dying on earth. and both together, dying and going to hell. So it's all about redemption for the last 500 years. That's not the essence of religion. The essence of religion is Genesis 1. It's about delighting in the joy of being on this unique planet. And science can help us so much because this planet is very, very special. We're learning that every day. So we have to move from this fall redemption version of religion to a creation-centered. And that's why art and science and other religions, interfaith or DPQ, is so important, because it brings it all together. Even in the Hebrew Bible, the Queen of Sheba is involved. She wasn't a Jew, and but she's involved because all humans bring wisdom about nature to us, and all religions do. And our wonderful diversity of ceremonies and rituals and liturgies and of course music and everything else, all that is part of the picture to wake us up. And of course, my work on the Cosmic Mass, which is why I became an Episcopal priest when the Pope fired me. To me, that's very important. We've had over, about 115 of these masses now. And we did one at the World Parliament of Religions a few years ago in Toronto, and 500 people came, including Buddhist monks in their robes and everything. And just tons of people said it was a high point of the 12-day conference, and many said it was a high point of their life. You know, that by bringing the new art forms, just like in the 12th century, they brought the new art form of stained glass windows and the Gothic cathedral with the light that's shown and all that. So today we have these new art forms, the DJs and the VJs and rap and so many postmodern art forms. These should be celebrated in worship. If worship is important, we would bring this language in. And of course, that's when the young get excited. The whole movement of the Cosmic Mass came from young people in Sheffield, England, who were DJs in the rave movement. And they sensed, they intuited that, hey, this has something to do with good religion. So they brought it to the church, the Anglican church there. That's when I first came across it. But, you know, people moan, oh, there are no young people, there are no young people. Well, maybe there are reasons why there are no young people. Maybe the language is boring and you're busy reading prayers from books. Are you kidding me? There's a Native American who was invited to lead prayers with others at the United Nations a few years ago. He told me the story. And he got up, when it was his time to pray, he got up and he said, I can't believe how all these white people have to read their prayers. In my tradition, prayer is what's in the heart. So you just speak it out, what's in the heart. Well, we have to find what page we're on. Put everyone to sleep in church that way. And it's no wonder people are voting with their feet. You bring the body in.
Be creative.
Unless you're afraid of it, unless you read it like Augustine did in Plato. But if you're a Christian, you bring the body in.
Yeah, here. Matthew, we're at the end of our time, which it has flown by. I want to again stress that you have written this incredible body of work, that a lot of these ideas that you've just talked about you really deeply developed them. So I want to encourage anyone who's listening to this to read anything written by Matthew Fox. It's it is inevitably provocative, but it helps one integrate in ways that are essential, I think, for this moment in human history. So Matthew, thank you for your wisdom, your time, for being a part of this.
Thank you, Cameron, for offering this platform and for asking the questions you're asking. It's so important about the future of spirituality.